Hi, everybody. My name is Rusty Pickens, and I'm your presenter for this session, and I'm excited to be here for Netroots Nation 21, even if we are virtual. We only have an hour together, so we're going to try to move through this pretty breezily and keep things moving here. But we're here today to talk about keeping your digital online operations secured, and I'm hoping that I can offer you some best practice tips and tricks out here to get you started thinking about that. Hopefully you can see my slide deck and we're ready to go. I want to give you a little bit of by way of intro here for me. So I usually characterize myself as a recovering government employee. I did a full 8 years with the Obama administration across multiple branches of government, U.S. State Department and the White House and the Small Business Administration, always working at the intersection of technology and government and public service. But before then, I was an organizer and was working back in the trenches of IT and IT security for the Obama for America campaign in Pennsylvania way back in 2008. And as I was putting the content for this deck together, I thought, man, those days sure do feel kind of quaint these days compared to lots of the technology that we're having to deal with today. So I'm hoping that my background lends it towards what you're thinking about and what you're working on in your own campaigns and organizing activities, and that any of the knowledge or information that I can share with you today will help you further that mission of making sure you get your candidates elected and making sure you're advocating for your issues out there. These days, I run my own company, 580 Strategies, and we do a lot of consulting work primarily for public sector, but sometimes for progressive activists and other campaigns. And so the thrust of this training comes out of what I call Agile Academy, which is where we train folks on software development and DevOps a lot. So hopefully this is going to be what you need over the next hour, and we can go dive right in. Okay, so for just to cover learning objectives here, the intent was to distill this down into really sort of an accessible 1-hour session for you, give you some best practices, tips, and recommendations that you can carry forward in your own organization. So we can't go too deep on any of this, even though I would love to spend all afternoon with you guys and talk about the depth of these topics. So the intent here is cut across many different topics very quickly, get you armed with sort of a checklist that you can take back to your teams and work with your IT security folks on getting these things implemented. So if you're an operational person or executive leadership on a team, you should be able to have a checklist you can come away with where you don't need to be an expert on that stuff, but you can take it to the people who can get it implemented for you. Or if you're working down in the trenches of IT or on IT security, this stuff will be familiar to you, and hopefully a lot of it resonates. So we'll go through this. We're going to cover the recommendations. I'll walk through as deep as I can go on most of them, and then we'll save our questions till the back end of the presentation and try to answer them and get moving for you. So what I want to leave you with as we start here is, most importantly, start thinking about your IT security, start small, and start now. Like, there are things that we're going to give you in this quick 1-hour session that you're going to be able to implement very quickly. You could have some of it done this weekend, and it's going to go a long way to securing your operations online. So with that, I want to set the stage here for why security is important. So a lot of this will not come as breaking news to most of you who've been doing any amount of online organizing at all. But we are constantly under attack from all sides. So there's everything from other party opposition research folks, people like Project Veritas, folks who are trying to knock on the front door of what you're doing, people who are trying to infiltrate what you're doing from the back door and get you uploaded with viruses or malware or other sneaky ways of getting into your systems. And the intent there is disrupt your activities, take you offline, make you unable to accomplish your mission, or in the sort of worst case scenario, steal your intellectual property or your campaign or your team's information there. That data is valuable. Your lists, your donors, your dollar amounts, your voters, anybody who has sort of inputted anything into the intellectual property of your mission is valuable to you, and you don't want to lose that. So we want to make sure that stuff is secured within the security perimeter properly and locked away so that people can't take off with that stuff, whether it's, list of fundraisers or internal communications, things that could be embarrassing if they made it out into the media. The best, way to protect against all this stuff is making sure that before you are attacked, before you're vulnerable, we've sort of locked all that stuff down and prepared you ahead of time for when those attacks do come. This stuff I like to think about infrastructure and IT as just as part and parcel as electricity or plumbing or your office space. So in any regard where you have that kind of operational mentality for just keeping the lights on for your teams, you should think about IT, and right alongside it, IT security as infrastructure that you would pay for just like you would electricity. So we can't really avoid that these days. Everything is online. So just treat that as a known quantity of information and critical infrastructure that you've got to go protect out there. The reason why is we see this stuff in the news all the time. So breaches on a massive scale, millions of people losing their personal information through vendors like Equifax. The John Podesta emails are a great example of how an entire campaign can go sideways because of targeted spear phishing that was to his personal Gmail account. Loss of financial information like the Capital One breaches. These are things that can just sink your entire campaign outfit or your nonprofit or your advocacy group if you lose that data. So we want to make sure that stuff is protected, locked away, and that you can rest easy at night knowing that your IT assets are secure. To end this slide off, I want to leave you with the idea that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure here. So if we just do a little bit of upfront planning, thinking about implementing these security best practices, they're going to pay dividends down the road. And it's much more expensive. It takes a lot more man hours, a lot more effort, and it's costly to recover from a breach once it happens. But if we can prevent that breach from happening in the first place, you'll be so much better off. So take the time now, implement this list I'm going to share with you, and then you can continue growing it from there and add to your security teams and augment this stuff even further. So this slide is meant to be your checklist. So I think we can distribute these. Either their stream is going to go up online or we can get the PDF document out to you. But here are the top 10 things that I want to talk about with you today. It was hard to choose just 10, so we're going to cover these pretty quickly, but I want you to be able to take this slide away and check this stuff off and just make sure that these things are done for your staff and for your organizations. And we could have easily tackled another 10 pretty quickly, but these were the ones that I thought were most important, biggest bang for your buck with the lowest level of effort, and things that you could even just be a novice or not even an IT or security technologist and go implement these things on your own. So take a look at that list, and then we're going to go point by point, and then we'll take your questions at the end. So the first one is super easy. This is almost handled by default these days. Almost every major operating system and system that's out there is starting to accept updates automatically. But if they're not, you need to go make sure that proactively we've turned that stuff on. Every server, every laptop, every iOS device, every handheld, whatever you have out there, go turn them on where that they are accepting patches and updates that come from the vendor immediately as soon as they are published. I've been doing enterprise IT for almost 25 years now, and there used to be a time where we didn't really trust vendor patches, and we would want to take those patches and we'd want to test them in our infrastructure and make sure that they were safe to roll out to our enterprises. Those days are gone. Things move too quickly. By the time a vulnerability is found out in the wild or identified by the security community, there's a very short window of time before that stuff is discovered, before people are starting to exploit it on your systems. So we don't have the luxury of slowing down and testing everything these days. But the good news is the vendors have vastly improved their game on the patching and the testing and the sort of integrity that they have around these updates. So I would say very few times nowadays when you receive a patch isn't likely to disrupt anything that's going on with your operations. And if it does, they're going to fix that really quickly. So the risk that you run of disruption by applying new patches quickly is so much smaller than the trade-off that you're preventing in terms of vulnerabilities by accepting these updates quickly. So go turn that stuff on. This is what I call set it and forget it. You can turn it on and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So for Windows, you see on the screen there, go into your Windows update, make sure that that stuff is enabled. For your iOS, go into your system settings there and turn those things on. And that's going to mean anytime the vendor pushes an update, you're going to get it. It's going to roll out in the middle of the night and you'll be protected first thing in the morning whenever you go to do your work. That's going to protect you from so many vulnerabilities in the future that we don't even know about now. So as stuff is discovered, as we go through time here, especially as we get into campaign season, those updates coming to your systems are just going to protect you in ways that you don't even know about yet. So go turn them on, check the box, enable automatic updates on everything that you've got, and that's going to keep you out of trouble where operating system vulnerabilities are concerned. Next up, password manager. So this one is a little more arduous, but you are already aware that we have so many accounts in our digital lives these days. So personal accounts, financial accounts, work accounts, school accounts, any cloud service that you need to sign up for, any app that you're putting on your phone. Generally, all those have a different set of credentials with them. It is almost impossible to manage your passwords at scale like that if you're not using a tool like a password manager. So what happens is we all fall into the lazy practice of using the same passwords, using shorter passwords, using passwords that are easy to remember or that we're sending through email or writing down on Post-it notes. Password managers help you diffuse all of that, and they tremendously up your security game in terms of the credential side of the equation. So where you go to a cloud system and you create a new account, you use these password managers to enroll that account in the system, and it's going to help you generate a really long, what we call a strong password that has a certain number of digits and a certain mix of characters and symbols in it that makes it harder to break if some attacker or hacker is trying to get into your password and they're just trying random strings and variables and trying to make sure they can get into your password. A strong password breaks that stuff. It vastly slows down the ability of them to get in through the front door of guessing your password. So that's the first thing that it does, lets you create easy, strong passwords. And then secondarily, it creates unique ones. So it's going to keep track of all these accounts. There will be one for your email, one for your bank, one for your credit card. You could have 3 different passwords for all of those, and you can enroll them in the password manager, and you don't have to remember that stuff. It's going to create a long password. It's going to store it securely in the cloud for you. And then when you go to log into your bank account, it's going to pull that password up and use it at that moment in time when you need it. So some of the vendors out there like LastPass or OnePass, the ones that we recommend here, you really only need to remember the one password that gets you into the password management system because it keeps up with all that stuff beyond that for you. So you need to download one of these. I would strongly recommend you just get in the habit of using it and adopt it over time. Every time you have to change a password for a new system or you hit, an expiration or you get a new account, log that into your password manager. And then the next thing you know, over a few weeks or months, you're going to have the bulk of your critical accounts protected in the password management system. And then at some point, when you get most of your passwords in there, they have some pretty cool features where you can do security audits on your password database, and it'll go through and it will look at your passwords and say, these are the same. You should think about making them unique, or this password is a little weak. It's a little too short. Maybe you want a longer one. It also has the added benefit of going and looking at other known data breaches. So in places like Equifax or Capital One where those credentials were lost, they'll know those passwords. And if they see your password is live in the open and hackers can get to it, they will recommend that you change that password. So they have a lot more added value than just storing your passwords, and they do all this stuff securely, and it sort of allows you to get your arms around the hundreds of passwords and accounts that you might need out there. And they will go with you. So they'll travel on your mobile devices and you can log in on your mobile device. So it's not like you're ever orphaned away from your passwords here. Or also in another worst case scenario, if you were to lose your passwords or your main systems, you can get back into this stuff because it exists in the cloud. So this stuff is strong, unique, and secure. So strongly urge you, adopt the password manager. LastPass or OnePass are 2 great ones to get started with. And that'll help you with the password, the username and password aspect of your security. Next up, part and parcel to the username and password. So this is something you've probably heard about before. It may sound a little confusing. So multi-factor authentication sounds like really heavy words. Don't stress about them. They are very, very simple. The picture of the key there, or we've got a lot of these keys around. It's just a tiny little USB key that you put on your keychain and you keep it with you. And it has the added benefit here of adding what we call a third factor to your login situation. So you have your username, you have your password, which is something that you know or something that your password manager knows, and then something that you have physically on your person that adds a third factor here. So if an attacker is trying to get into the system and they know your username and password, but if they don't have this key, they can't actually successfully log in as you. So multi-factor, again, ups the difficulty on an attacker trying to get into your system so dramatically higher than if you didn't have one. Multi-factor is sort of the last best line of defense here for a lot of the attacks that we see nowadays, and it's strongly, strongly recommended. These are cheap. They're about $20, and they will work with multiple different systems. So you can roll these out with all your email provider platforms and many of the other cloud services out there. if you are leading or running an institution, or if you're an IT security person for a group or an organization, I strongly recommend adopt this wholeheartedly and get one of these for every one of your staffers. And it will protect you guys from people trying to impersonate your accounts or hacking into things out there. And it also leads into protecting against an attack we call phishing that I'll talk a little bit about more in a minute. But these make your accounts more phishing resilient, where it's harder for those attacks to actually succeed if they do happen and somehow they get through all the systems and get in and get the vulnerability into your inbox where they want to be. Finally, so there's two other ways of doing multi-factor authentication that are quite common. There are code generators that you can download on your phone. So many of the big vendors, Microsoft, Salesforce, Amazon, they have some of these. There are others that are more generic, like Authy or some of the other well-known code generators. Google Authenticator is a good one that will work with multiple systems. Those are a second best option. So if you can't get the physical hard key, go to the next level lower and go to the code generator, and that'll be super helpful too. In the cases of shared accounts where you might have like high profile Twitter accounts or other things like that that need to be protected with multi-factor authentication, the code generator will help you with that, because multiple people can have the code generators on their phone, whereas you really only have one copy of the physical keys. And then the last thing is, sort of the fallback to all of this is SMS or text-based multi-factor, where they text you a code. Generally, that's okay for you to use if you're not dealing with super sensitive information, or if you're working domestically here in the US, it's probably okay and safe to use that. But I would caution against it. Don't consider that safe, especially if you're overseas, especially, you know, if there might be life safety issues, especially if you're working with international partners who may be of importance to certain nation state actors in the world who are up to no good. SMS can be compromised. They can capture your cell phone signal, impersonate it, and receive that code. So don't trust that an SMS text message is always 100% secure, but it may be okay in a pinch, and it might be okay as sort of a third, you know, nice to have out here if you can't get any of the rest of it to work. But generally, these are the way to go. Strongly recommend them. You should adopt them tomorrow and get them rolled out if you can. Tip 4, so this is another easy one. It's also sort of along the vein of set it and forget it. So using internet browser plugins that just sort of protect your online browsing habits. So if you're running an organization, and also, you know, if you're just a privacy conscious consumer, I would strongly recommend you take a look at a few of these. There are lots of them. These are just a few that I wanted to highlight here for you, but think about how you can lock down your browsing habits so that vendors and data aggregators and people who are up to no good on the internet are not keeping up with your privacy as you're browsing out there. Some of the ones that I like are you know, easy ones. So some are provided by Google. Google lets you have an opt-out tool that'll forcefully opt you out of what they were tracking about you. There's a really good one that I love called uBlock Origin, which is a really strong one, and it keeps getting better. It prevents adware, malware, and sort of any of that tracking sort of traffic that would be trying to embed in your browser. It just shuts it off at the source. So the minute they see your browser trying to connect to that stuff somewhere within web page code, they'll kill it right away. It used to be that these kind of interfered in your normal web ops, but it's in a very slim minority, and it's sort of an outlier these days where they'd actually disrupt your actual online browsing. So those are good ones that you can install. They will protect you and watch your back as you're going about your day and browsing around on the internet. There's a third one worth mentioning, HTTPS everywhere. So if you don't know about HTTPS, it adds the little green lock on your browser up there, and it encrypts and, you know, sort of scrambles the traffic between your web browser and whoever's web service you're talking to. So in a lot of cases, we haven't fully made the move to the secure side, the HTTPS side. It's still just the old plain HTTP. HTTPS will try to force that traffic to the higher side and make it secure. So it's helpful, and it will point out to you in very stark terms if you've hit a website that's not secure. It'll let you know right away. So that sort of gives you a reminder, hey, I might not want to put any sensitive information in here because it's going to be sent in clear text across the internet. So consider HTTPS anywhere, everywhere as you are exploring these plugins. And there's a lot of others. These are just 3 that I thought would be helpful to you that cover a lot of different tools. The browsers themselves are also worth mentioning. So the browser wars have been going on for a decade plus now. It's hard to tell who's on top. You know, you see the big icons there, Firefox, Google, Microsoft Edge is really an improvement over Internet Explorer, Safari, and Opera. you should do a little research on them and pick the one that's the best fit for you. There are trade-offs to all of them in terms of security and speed and privacy of your data that you need to consider there. And it's kind of beyond the scope of our seminar to really talk about that. But pick the best one. If you are super privacy conscious, I would recommend a browser called Brave Browser, as they have been rebooting and building themselves from the ground up to protect your data and not let this stuff get shared. So whereas most of the others have been trying to bolt on security later as they go, Opera and Brave and some of the others have been trying to do that from the beginning. So check that out. It's not the most mainstream yet, but it is up and coming. And then there's another search engine to consider with a strange name called DuckDuckGo, and they do the same thing. So I set them as the homepage here. And instead of using Google as my default search engine, if I'm just looking for something absentmindedly off the top of my head, I use DuckDuckGo because they dump that privacy data right away. They are not selling your data. They don't care what you're searching for, and they don't look to save that stuff. Whereas, you know, the Googles and the Apples and the Facebooks of the world, every time you're putting in any bit of data or searching or looking for something, they're keeping that and they're storing it, and they may be doing something with it. So if you're super privacy conscious, Brave Browser and DuckDuckGo are two sort of services and browser recommendations that I'd have for you. Other than that, a quick search is going to turn up a lot of other plugins that you can go look at, but I would strongly recommend find a good browser, find the good plugins, and stick with them and just bake them into your online browsing life. This one, again, is also another set it and forget it, easy tip. If your organization or if you're using Google's Mail, you should go investigate and turn on Advanced Protection Program right away. This is a thing that is relatively new to the scene. It has been used most recently within the Biden transition team, and before that, a little earlier in some of the presidential campaign races. This is Google's attempt to really lock down and secure Gmail inboxes for people who are highly visible or who could be, you know, targets of nation state hacking campaigns. So political activists, politicians, leaders of nonprofits, political figures, you know, folks who might have a high profile that people could be seeking to try to disrupt or get into those accounts with. So APP attempts to protect against that, and it does a pretty darn good job of it. It used to be exclusive, and you had to be, you know, of that sort of level of visibility before they would give it to you, but now it's available for everyone. So it is generally available, and you just need to go search for it and browse the web page and sign up for it. Anybody with a Google account can do that these days. The one setback is you need 2 multi-factor authentication keys. So whereas we have the hard physical key, you're going to need 2 of those in order to enroll your accounts in the program. And that's because this program is very, very strict. It locks down that account super securely, and it's going to make you have a backup key just in case for some reason you lose or misplace the first one, you can get back in there. If you lose both of them, you're going to be locked out for a while, and you'll have to call and contact Google support to get your account back unlocked. So that could be a little bit arduous, but hide one of those keys, keep it in a safe place, keep the other one on keychain wherever you need it, and then go enroll in this. And it's going to give you several benefits. So the very first thing is it's going to start using multi-factor authentication for your Google account right now, which makes it tremendously harder to break into and phishing resilient. But then if you're also using Google products alongside that with your Google account, if you're using their Chrome browser or if you're using Gmail, they're going to start scanning your email and protecting you against some of those phishing attacks. And actually, I was just reading about a phishing campaign that was happening today that APP has been protecting against out there. So that gives you a little added safety net where the Google Mail team is watching your back and trying to make sure that if you're using their services, that you're not getting hacked there through some of their extra security layers. So strongly recommended. If you have a Google account, you should go investigate this, buy the keys, sign up, turn it on, and it's going to keep you out of trouble later. Once again, set it and forget it. Okay, number 6, phishing. So if you don't know about phishing, we could talk hours just about phishing alone. And really the takeaway here is that I want you to be aware of what this is, and I want you to think about how to implement a training or awareness program for your organization. So phishing is the attacking vulnerability and method whereby, you know, some bad actor on the internet is going to send an email to you with a suspicious link in it. And if you click on that link, it may look like Google, it may look like Microsoft or Facebook, and they could ask you to reset your password. And if you type your password in there, boom, they've got it and they keep it and they log back into your account, change the password and lock you out. Or worst case scenario, they don't tell you they're logging into your account and they just go in and steal all of your sensitive files or go read your email. This is how John Podesta was hacked. It's how many other people have been hacked. Phishing is rampant and it's really, really terrible. And it's across most of the organizations. You see the stat there, up to 75% of organizations have reported undergoing a phishing attack. And a good majority of them have had successful phishing attacks. So we got to be super vigilant. This is a tough problem to solve because those phishing emails show up in many different shapes and sizes and colors and different patterns. It's almost impossible to protect against all of them. So you need to be aware of this and you need to treat and train your staff so that they should be looking out for this stuff. If they see an email that looks like it's from the big boss urging them to do something with IT security and has a link in it, they need to make sure they can validate that that link is indeed from the boss and it is indeed something to do with IT security and that they're not clicking on something that, you know, a bad actor on the internet has sent them hoping that they can trick you into clicking on that. So this is one of the very common ways that we get vulnerabilities introduced into our system that are successful. They can install software this way. They can steal your credentials. There's a lot of no good that they can get up to here by the virtue of just someone innocently or being in a hurry clicking on a link in an email. So be aware, phishing is rampant. Phishing can be broad. So that's what the PH in phishing means, is it is just a lot of different attacks across a lot of different surfaces. So they are just phishing to see who's going to bite. There's an alternative one we call spear phishing, which is very, very targeted, and that can be tailored specifically to you. So it might show up with your name on it or an organization that somebody knows that you trust. Could be your bank account. You know, it could try to impersonate your Facebook account, something like that. Something that looks very much like something that you would come across in your daily online life. You know, a simple benign email that looks like it's from your bank may be a good example. But it could be impersonated through another hacking outfit and they could be trying to steal your credentials. So those spear phishing ones are usually the worst because they look very, very close to being legitimate, and you need to look through and make sure the URLs look right. Take very gentle care with those emails and be cautious around that stuff because they could be a disguised attacker out there. There's lots of things you can do to prevent against this. The best one is to implement really strong email filters for your entire organization. So if you're running G Suite or Google Workspace, Microsoft Office 365, any of the bigger email providers out there will have an email gateway where you can put a filter in place and you can block bad actors, or you can pay for services that will auto block that stuff and just sort of skim it out so that it never reaches your inbox. There are other tools that will embed in your inboxes where if somebody sees a phishing email, they can flag it as a bad email and then it will be blocked at the email gateway. So there's lots of different technology we can bring to bear on this that will be helpful. And that's where I think you should focus, is start there and then start training people, because if we can keep that email out of the inbox, it's going to go a long way to protecting you against this stuff. There's other things on the back end. So this is getting a little bit in the weeds, but properly configuring your email servers with DMARC, DKIM, and SPF are 3 tech ways that we can prevent some of this. And essentially that means we're making sure that email providers on the internet who are sending our team email are indeed good actors and they are where they say they're coming from on the internet. So those are helpful. They won't prevent everything, but they do prevent a little of this. If you're worried about file attachments coming in and people opening those from emails, you should probably disable your Microsoft Office macros. So if you're using MS Office on your desktop computers, that's an attack vulnerability or vector where they can, upload malware. If you happen to open a PDF file or an attachment of some sort that looked like it was okay, they'll fire up those macros and use those to compromise your system. So disabling those is a good step. You can do that as a matter of policy across the whole organization. So if you don't know what that stuff means, it's okay. Talk to your IT professionals about it and they'll help you get it implemented there. And then finally, the rest is sort of cultural. So I would recommend implement an awareness training program of some sort. So, take a staff meeting or a brown bag lunch, explain to people what phishing is, why it's important, and impart to them that, internet security and online security for us is kind of a shared cultural value for your organization, because anybody can be attacked, from your CEO or your executive director all the way down. And it doesn't really matter who gets compromised. If that attack is bad enough, it's going to blow up everything everything behind the firewall and everything within your system there. So all it takes is one misclick from even an intern and you're in trouble. So the security is everybody's collective responsibility there, and you need to let people know about that. And then if you have the capacity, train and test people. So there's a couple of recommendations here on the screen. ESET and Proofpoint have some free training out there. So if you don't want to go pay for it or you don't have the budget, you can kind of get started with some easy to use, accessible, pretty thin phishing training out there that will help. It's better than nothing. Or you can go pay for the larger ones where you can go through, full courses on phishing training out there. And then you can also test your users. So there are some services that will actually phish your organization and see who clicks on stuff and give you a report back. And so that's probably an extreme case, but you might want to think about that. Like sometimes shame works in this environment too, where if you can call out people for clicking on those emails, they'll make sure that they're a little more diligent the next time they try to click on one. So that's up to you. It's a cultural equation and a budget equation for your organization, but there's really not too much that you can't do on this front. Phishing is really rampant and it's hard to combat. So I would recommend focus on that as much as possible, but it's a really deep issue all on its own. Okay, secure messaging. So this is definitely for the online organizers out there. This one is tougher. So your internal comms are just like your intellectual property. So if people are sending email and your staff is talking back and forth to each other, you want to consider those communications safe and private. If you're using vendor-provided platform-based apps out there, we can't confidently say that's the case. If you're using WhatsApp, if you're using Facebook Messenger, if you're using GChat, there's a very good chance there that the vendors on the back end of those systems can get into those channels and see that stuff if they need to. Not too long ago, most of that was pretty easy to access, just for safety and privacy's sake. They could go and see those emails and maybe even use them for data mining. With some of the recent news, they have increased their amount of safety controls around that. But I still would say you cannot trust these platform-provided vendor messaging tools to keep your communications totally private. So that's why we're recommending other apps out here. I would strongly recommend move your users off those commercially provided ones and get into some of these that are built to keep your information private here. So the top two that come to mind is an app called Signal and another one called Telegram. And they attack this problem in two different ways, but they're sort of the same outcome. They're built to be encrypted end to end. So if you have Signal and I have Signal and I'm sending you a message, we know that between the strong encryption on both of our systems, that the message that goes between those two is locked down all the way through. So while it may go across the internet, while it may even go across the Signal servers, there's no shared certificate in the middle. There's no way for the vendor to even dip into that conversation or look at that message and decrypt it because they don't have the key. The key only lives with me and the person that I'm talking to. And so if you take the time to download the app and verify the identity of the person on the other end, you can have a much more private conversation through some of these apps than you would over WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. And I think the analogy I like to use here is if Facebook or WhatsApp is served with a congressional subpoena or a legal subpoena, they're going to have to turn that stuff over. So there are back doors that exist in these cases where they may have to disclose some of that data, and you don't want to be in that situation. If you're running an advocacy campaign or a political campaign, you'd probably prefer that none of that stuff ever see the light of day in most cases. So I would strongly urge you, adopt these tools and keep that stuff out of the public eye there and out of the vendor's hands, most importantly. The thing I will leave you with here is that it's also not impossible for that stuff to be intercepted as well. So you still need to think about people taking screenshots or people, shoulder surfing and looking at an app on somebody's phone. So you still shouldn't consider any of this super, super private, but at least it's going to keep it out of the hands of the vendor and make sure that that Signal message is encrypted as it's moving across the internet there. So check those three out. Signal, Telegram, and Status is the new one that's up and coming. They attack the problem in different ways, and you'll be able to find one probably that works for your organization. But I would mandate don't use text messaging or MMS, and don't use platform vendor provided messaging services. Adopt these things and make them just a way of life, and you'll protect yourself a lot more. Your comms will be private in that way. Okay, moving quickly. So tip number 8 is another set it and forget it tip here. Encrypt your mobile drives and even your desktop drives and servers too, if you have those these days. But if you're running field operations and you've got people with laptops out in the field or iOS devices or whatever that they may be traveling around and doing voter registration work or advocacy data, and they're traveling a lot, that's an inherent vulnerability too. We don't want your team to have spreadsheets on computers and then lose that computer and all that stuff be unencrypted so that anybody who finds it can fire it up, make a copy of it, try to hack into it from some regard. So encrypting your drives protects you against loss of that data if the thing is stolen or if you lose the hard drive somehow. So this can get a little complicated. Windows is a little finicky about it, but you should go check out device encryption on Windows. There's a tool called BitLocker that's pretty easy to set up. You can do that as a matter of policy across all your systems or in your enterprise and turn those on. And then the other one on iOS makes it a little easier, and most of it is on by default. So the data protection, is what they call it, is encryption on the iOS devices, and it does the same thing. But the intent here is that if you lose that device or that hard drive is compromised, you want to make sure that the data that you've stored on it, even if it was innocent or it just happened in the course of affairs of you doing your work, is locked away from somebody who might be able to recover that drive later. So strongly recommended, turn this on all your systems and don't worry about it anymore. Like, it'll protect your data in case there's a theft out there. Number 9. Okay, so this is a little difficult too. So this also applies to people who do a lot of field work. Employ VPNs. So a VPN stands for a virtual private network. And I tried to give you a skinny graphic there that shows you how this breaks down. But essentially, if you're at a coffee shop and you're browsing your email or just surfing around on the internet, there is a chance that some of those sites, especially if they are not HTTPS, that your traffic is going to go across the internet in clear text. So heaven forbid you'd put a password or something specific in, something sensitive in there that might go out across the internet in that way. There are sites that are still built that way, unfortunately, these days, and you could stumble into that. So if it's not HTTPS and you're on an untrusted network, so if you're at an airport, if you're in a coffee shop, and you're at a WeWork or another guest office somewhere, you don't know who owns that internet provider. So the Wi-Fi should be considered suspicious, and the internet connection itself should be considered suspicious. And a VPN protects you from that. So the best way to think about a VPN is it's going to wrap all of your internet browsing and encrypt it and hide it from anybody who might be trying to listen into it down the wire. So it's a good practice to have. It's a little complicated because you need to remember to turn it on, and sometimes they sort of slow things down a little bit. But I would strongly urge you, anytime you're in an untrusted network or you're doing something sensitive on the internet, maybe even if you're on a trusted network, you should turn on a VPN and make sure that you protect your internet traffic as it's going across the wire. It's also important to make sure you pay for that service. So there are a lot of VPN vendors, and some of them are in the business of selling your data. So logging what you're looking at on the internet, or making sure you know how you connect to things, or if you're doing market research on your internet browsing out there. So most of the paid services are not doing that by virtue of you paying for the service. So that's how they make their income. They pay for really high quality services that they provide you those services that you are paying for. And then also make sure they have a good privacy policy. So go do your homework on that vendor and make sure you're picking a good one out there, and they'll take care of you. I have some recommended ones here. These change an awful lot, but these were sort of the top 4 as of about a week ago whenever I took a look at this. NordVPN is a great one. Express and Surfshark, I think, are new ones, but there's lots of them. They're kind of commodities. Make sure you find a paid one. Make sure they have a good privacy policy, and then be diligent to turn them on, and that will keep your internet browsing traffic secure. So super helpful for field folks or people who are traveling a lot. Make sure you have a VPN in your back pocket and protect your browsing history there. And then finally, so tip number 10 is encrypted offsite backups. So this one starts to get into ransomware, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. Ransomware right behind phishing is kind of rampant. It is a really huge problem. And it's hard to protect against ransomware because it's so malicious. So there's a lot of things you can do to be proactive and protect yourself against ransomware attacks in the first place. We have a whole list about that. I could talk about that for a long time. It's almost out of the scope of our seminar here. But one of the best ways you can protect yourself and your data from a ransomware attack is make sure you're backing your data up, that you're encrypting it, and then it's moved off-site. So that is kind of difficult, and depending on how much data you have, how big your systems are, what kind of cloud computing environments you have, or how large your organization is, backups can be a huge deal. So I would urge you, think about that and think about implementing a really strong, disciplined backup routine that backs this stuff up frequently, stores it offsite, and make sure that it's encrypted. And what that's going to do is protect you against the eventuality that maybe there's a catastrophic failure here and you lose a system, or ransomware attacks you and encrypts all of your drives, and all of a sudden you can't get back into anything. You'll have this backup on the shelf that you can dust off, wipe all those systems out, start them over from scratch, and then restore that data. So think of it as protecting your intellectual property, your organizational assets, and backing up the data that's most important to you. If you don't have a good encrypted offsite backup, you're going to have trouble recovering from ransomware if that ever happens to you. This is the hardest part of everything, is you lose that data as well as the operational side of it. It's also important to mention, make sure that it's encrypted. So think about that just like you would a laptop or a mobile device. If that gets lost, or if somebody steals it, or if you somehow lose the hard drive on the way to the offsite storage, you want to make sure the backups are encrypted as well, so that you protected the data that you're moving offsite. So encryption is key. Offsite is key. Make sure it's not connected to any of your systems, and make sure that they're done frequently. So encrypted offsite backups, hard to do. Make sure you get a good process, implement that with your IT team, make sure you test it, make sure you roll it out, and make it just sort of a matter of course, and it'll be a good protection there against ransomware. Unfortunately, we could talk about ransomware a lot more. There's a lot of other things to do and protect yourself there against. I think I would mention some of them here. So if you have been compromised, if there's a vulnerability that's happened to you, or an attack that you think has happened, certainly if it's ransomware, you should consider talking to federal authorities right away. So the branch of the government that handles this is CISA. They're a part of DHS, the cybersecurity, I forget their acronym, but they are charged with protecting all the critical infrastructure across the system. And they're also the nexus of all this information for keeping up with what vulnerabilities are happening and coordinating any responses to that if it comes out. So you can email them there. You can also reach out to them. If you are hit with ransomware, federal guidelines are not to pay for that. So that's where the backups become important. Make sure your data is on the shelf. Make sure you can get it back, that you don't have to negotiate with these folks. And most importantly, that you don't have to come out of pocket from your organization and pay for that, because there's no guarantee they're going to decrypt your data. And it just further incents them to do that again to the next organization. So unfortunately, ransomware is kind of a way of life. There's a lot more resources on the internet that you should go explore if you're thinking about that, because this is a really tough and up and coming area that we need to spend a lot more time on. I wish I could have spent an entire hour on ransomware, but I thought I'd mention it here at the end. Okay, so we've got a few minutes, I think, and I am open for questions here. If you guys have specific questions, or if we want to review anything in a little more detail, I think we've got about 10 minutes. Chuck, I may have to enlist your help here on the question side, or maybe they'll just pop into the chat.
Yeah, I am excited to hear what people thought about your amazing presentation. Thank you so much for your service, public service over the course of 2 decades now, eh? I really appreciate it. I was in Montana for President Obama on the ground, helping organize active duty and veterans in Great Falls. So really appreciate everything you did.
Oh man, yeah, that was a cool trip. Those were the good days. I miss them every day. Let's see. So Ruby's the only one who's chatted us here. Yeah. So you were just saying 2-factor authentication apps. Yeah, there's tons of them, and they're plenty. I have been using Authy lately because it'll keep a backup of all that stuff. So I sort of learned the hard way that if you lose your Google Authenticator, you got to re-enroll all the 2-factors. So yeah, check those out. 1Password is a new one as well, and they will help you keep track of all those passwords for you and do a really good job with that. Let's see here. Any questions, anybody? This was intended to be a top 10 list that you can just sort of take back to your organizations and ask a few questions. And if you don't have them handled, maybe start to handle them in the near future. And then as you've seen, you can kind of go as deep as you want on any one of them. So I was hoping I gave you a good overview of that stuff, and you can sort of get started on these back home whenever you get back to your desks.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. If you found Rusty's content actionable, because we're always looking, to have quality presentations at Netroots, please type a 1. Let us know that you took copious notes and you're ready to go back to your organization and implement some of the amazing suggestions that Rusty shared with us. So yeah, let's type in some 1s if you're taking this back today. Gabriella is asking if you can actually share the presentation. Rusty?
I'm happy to. Yeah, I can PDF this or get you a Google slide deck. I don't know the best way to distribute that, Chuck, but we can maybe post it in the collaboration pieces of the app if that's possible.
That's absolutely possible. So yeah.
Okay.